Thank you, Craig, and thank you everyone for being here. Again, my name is Jarrett Brandt. It's such an honor to be here. I'm a class of 2014 United States Naval Academy graduate, and then served as an infantry officer in the Marines until 21 before doing my career transition. So thank you again for being here. It's such an honor to be a part of this event and this day. And what we're really just hoping to get out and talk about is, how 9/11 affected us. How that changed the lives of those of us that are up here, and really hear some incredible stories from our panel participants of where they were that day and how that day changed their lives. So just to kind of get us going, I'll tell my very quick 9/11 story. I was 9 years old when 9/11 happened. I remember sitting in my parents' room watching those events unfold on the news. And then that really, of course, changed the trajectory of my life, impacted my decision to serve in the Marines, go to the Naval Academy. And I still think about that day a lot. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-moderator, Shaw, and let him tell his story a little bit real quick, and then we'll get to our panel members.
Okay, mic check. Can everyone hear me? Great, okay. So Jared and I run the Wells Fargo DC Veterans Chapter. So when all these panels opened up to say, hey, which one do you guys want to moderate? I saw 9/11. Why? I'm from New York. I'm a native New Yorker. I was actually commissioned 10 days before 9/11 in New York City. So I was a Fordham ROTC grad. Took my oath September 1st. I had to take summer classes because I was slacking in college. So I had to take a couple of summer classes. But then I got commissioned, and then 10 days later, 9/11 hit. So my parents still live in Queens. I saw the smoke from Queens. And then a month and a half later, as an artillery officer, King of Battle, I joined November 1st. A year and a half later, I was in the desert. So 9/11 definitely changed for me because my ROTC training doctrine, if everyone remembers back then, FM7-8 was based on Vietnam-era jungle tactics, right? So when 9/11 hit, that went all out the window, and I played soldier in Baghdad. So 9/11 still hit home for me, being a New Yorker. Family still in New York, so honored to host this panel. Jared?
Yeah, thanks, Shaw. And so now, Nils, I'm going to come to you first. So just very quickly, Nils is a New York City firefighter, Army Reserve veteran. I'll let you kind of talk about your background a little bit real quick. But then if you could just tell us where you were when you found out what was going on that day and kind of your story throughout the day, and we'll start there.
Yes, sir. Very grateful, first-generation American. Born and raised in New York City. I followed my father into the New York City Fire Department after a 2-year stint with New York City Police Department. And on the morning of 9/11, I was actually working on my moonlight job. At the time, I had 2 of them, 3 jobs altogether because it's very expensive there as it is here to live. So I was driving an oil truck in the area of Staten Island, which is one of the 5 boroughs. And heard on the news radio, plane hit the tower. I kind of knew immediately something was not right. Initially, being a jaded New Yorker, I thought it was just a plane getting a little too close for a photo of the towers, which sometimes pilots would try to do. And but immediately upon the second plane, I knew we were under attack. I was at the first bombing in '93, and they trained us to be ready. They used to tell us it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we had a training manual with a target that was on the World Trade Center. So I realized that that was the day. I raced into my command in Brooklyn, New York, which was Ladder Company 114, lovingly known as Tally Ho, which was from an airborne ranger who came home after jumping Normandy and refused to say 10-4 on the radio. He'd say Tally Ho. So all these years later, it sticks. So that's to you airborne rangers. It was Jack Carroll who started that. Got into command. They ordered us to commandeer a city bus, which we did, the off-duty platoon. And as we were racing over the Brooklyn Bridge, the second tower fell down right in front of us. So the 30 of us on that bus were well aware that a lot of our colleagues, including my childhood best friend, were amongst the missing and within days to be deemed killed in the line of duty. We just initially went right in and started searching the debris piles. It was kind of hard to digest the fact that these massive 110-story buildings that I had been in many times with visiting family from Ireland as a tourist, we're now just this 10-story pile of rubble. And within an hour, the major's colleagues were flying sorties right above our heads, whipping out into the East River and turning back on a wild bank and coming right back over. And a lot of you folks here were, not even born, but we didn't have smartphones then, so we really had no idea what was going on. And we truly thought we were at war. And we didn't really get solid information until about 12 hours later that we were not technically under a military army attack, but we had been attacked by terrorists.
And Nils, I'm
Yes,
going
I'm
to jump
sorry.
in. No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to jump over to Ron at this point. So everyone, this is Ron DeFrancisco. I'm going to let him talk about his background real quick, and I think that's kind of a good segue, like moving through the timeline of the day. So Ron, can you tell us about where you were on September 11th and your story for the day?
Sure. Can you hear me? So,
There you go. The mic's off, I think.
is my mic on? Can you hear me? Good?
No, it's good.
Great. So, I worked in the World Trade Center. They say I'm the last man out of the South Tower. On 9/11, I was trapped above the impact zone. I was working on the 84th floor. I was in the trading room. Would get there every morning at 6:45, beautiful sunny day, and sitting at my desk wondering what was happening in the Tokyo markets, London markets, and then back to the right there was a big loud explosion. We saw fireballs suck in on itself and thousands upon pieces of paper flying out above us. So we all ran over towards the North Tower, and we saw this huge gaping hole in the side of the building. There were people standing in the windows looking frantically, and they decided to jump. It was something a lot of you people are being trained now, and thank you for your service, but I was not trained for this. I didn't understand what was going on. I went back to my desk, and a lot of people were leaving, but I'm a Canadian, and I didn't know a lot about terrorism. I was calling people on the phone, and they were calling me, but I was trapped inside, and I didn't know that there was an attack going on. I just thought a light plane had gone off course. I got a call from a friend and told me to leave the building, and as I was leaving, the second plane hit our building. I was still on our floor. United Flight hit the second tower from 78 to 85 and sliced right through our trading room. We got knocked flying, and we got up, took all the debris off us, and started to go into the stairwell. We ran down a few flights of stairs and met a few people down below, and they said we couldn't get out. There was too much smoke and fire and flame down below. So we started to climb up. I guess we got to about the 91st floor and realized we couldn't get out of the building. So at that point, true panic for me started to set in. I scrambled back down, but the smoke was very thick, and we were all laying down, trying to get beneath the hot, choking smoke. And people were going to sleep, and I hope a lot were dying at that point. And then someone called me, and I went towards the flame and the fire. In a last-ditch effort for air, I pushed against the drywall to try to get out. I saw the staircase down below and slid down it. And I ran down 3 flights of stairs that were on fire. On my way down, I ran into 3 firefighters coming up. I told them that I was having trouble breathing, and they told me that I'd get help down below. So I ran all the way down. And when I got to the ground floor, I tried to get out in the courtyard facing the other tower, but they wouldn't let us out just because there were too many bodies and too much debris. It was a war zone. So they made us go down in the basement, and as I was in the basement, I ran into a colleague of mine And we started walking, and that's when we heard the building come down. I looked to my right and saw a huge fireball coming at me, and I ran. And then I woke up 3 days later in the hospital.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Ron. And folks, so next I'd like to go to Major Heather Penny. Heather was an Air Force fighter pilot, ended up serving 2 tours in Iraq, and I think has really an amazing story, not only in Iraq, but with where you were on September 11th. So Heather, can you please tell us about your experience that day?
I was sitting in a scheduling meeting, figuring out what that next week's flying schedule is going to be, who is going to be on what lines, what types of sorties we would fly, when one of our enlisted troops, David Callahan, just walked in and said, an airplane flew into the World Trade Center. We looked out the windows, and it was a lot like today. Not a cloud in the sky, totally clear blue, just a puff of wind. And we made the assumption that it was a light aircraft that just made a wrong turn down the Hudson, made a few jokes about it, and went back to work. And it wasn't until Chunks came back a second time and said a second aircraft hit the other World Trade Center, it was on purpose. We got up, went to the squadron bar, and we saw what everyone else saw. We knew we had to get airborne. We knew we had to protect and defend. We're at Andrews Air Force Base. You know, this is the capital of the free world. But we're an Air National Guard unit. And after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was the end of history, right? Nothing bad was ever going to happen. The democracy, liberalism had prevailed. And so the nation cut the Air Force in half, literally. And all of the alert units that used to ring our borders to protect and defend our airspace were shut down. There are only 5 squadrons, lonely squadrons left at the 4 corners of the continental United States and Otis, Massachusetts. We were not an alert squadron. So we didn't have any live weapons. We didn't have any jets hot cocked ready to go. And I wasn't trained for it. Back then, the training that we received for hijacking was based off of what happened in the 1970s and 1980s, where you taxied up to the airliner, you waved to get the terrorist attention and say, hey, let's go land somewhere, where they would land and negotiate for whatever amount of money they wanted and release a few prisoners and so forth. We knew that was not the situation. We also didn't have any weapons aboard our aircraft. So when we finally got the call from Vice President Cheney, aren't there fighters at Andrews, somebody get them airborne? Mark Sasseville, our commander at the time, Lucky, you're with me, let's go. I run down, chasing Sass down to life support where all of our flight gear is. And I'm putting on my G suit when Sass looks at me and says, I'll crash into the cockpit. And I would crash my F-16 into the tail of the aircraft. Because we knew that there was another airliner inbound. Potomac Approach had called us and said, we think there's another airliner inbound. It's low, we think it's probably coming in over the river. I ran after Sass towards the first jets on the flight line. We scramble in. And at this point, I just have to rely on my own knowledge of aircraft systems to get it started. Because normally it takes, at that time, before GPS, it took us 10 to 15 minutes just to wake up the aircraft, program it, get its inertial navigation system up and going. I didn't have 10 minutes. Master battery on, JPA start 2, 20%. The smoke was coming up and drifting slowly to the northeast towards the mall. And we headed out to the northwest, but we never found anything. Because the passengers on Flight 93 were the true heroes.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Heather. Wow, Heather, and Nils and Ron, thank you so much for sharing those parts of the story. And what I'd like to do now, and Shaw, I'm going to come back to you, and talk to me about, we've talked a little bit about kind of our initial experiences on September 11th. Tell me about how that, the next decade after that, like, changed your life, like what you thought your life was going to be, and then what your experience turned into in Iraq.
So I think we talked about how 9/11 changed a lot. So that was definitely my follow-up question to you all, how it changed for us. I know when I got to Fort Sill, November 1st, 2001, you could tell it was a very different mindset. I had a class with other Marines, because Marines didn't have their own artillery school, so they came to us. But we were all getting ready as that's when Afghanistan started hitting off. So we knew we were going to the sandbox at some point. So the training was very serious, right? And then, a year later, I thought my first station was at bomb holder of 1st Armored Division. So first year going to Germany, like, it was supposed to be a cush tour, but, stayed about a year before we got orders to go to Iraq. And so it definitely changed the trajectory of my life for the next 10 years, totally different than what I thought was going to be. I thought I was going to have party in Europe and go across the different countries instead, spend about a year and a half between Baghdad and other parts of Iraq. So it definitely changed for me. I'm curious to see you all. And I'll say right immediately after 9/11, again, I'm born and raised in New York. New York City is known as a city that never sleeps, but I saw New York shut down for the first time in my life. I remember the stock market was closed for, I forgot how long it was closed for.
A week.
A week, right? But New York was shut down. I have family in the NYPD, so it was definitely a weird vibe in New York for the immediate time period. And then life has just completely changed. So I'm curious to see about you all, like, in immediate aftermath, and then the next 5. I know we talked a little bit beforehand, Ron, about how things changed for you, but I'm curious to see how it is for you guys, especially the first year after, and then the next 10 years or so after 9/11. Yeah, you're right here.
So for me, I was banged up quite badly in the hospital. I had burns on 60% of my body. I had a laceration in my head, a broken bone in my back, and my contact lenses were melted to my eyes. But I was alive, and I didn't even know the buildings came down. I woke up 3 days later. I had been intubated, and I guess about a week later, I was right down at St. Vincent's, so right in the thick of the city there. And when I found out that the buildings came down, I got really panicked, and I didn't think of terrorism. I was, the world's watching from outside, and all the cameras are watching it, but I was in the thick of it, and I didn't see what had happened. So when I started to recover, I wanted to go home, and so they brought me back to New Jersey, where I lived with my family, and I recovered at home for a very long time. But the world and the city, it affected a lot. We had guys in the UK that I worked with that passed away, and some Canadians, and a ton of Americans, almost 3,000 people. And right after 9/11, I think New York, and Nils and I were talking about this, New York was great, and the people were so welcoming and happy and helpful. And then, I don't know, we're in this situation now, 22 years later. So.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks, Ron. And Nils, I'll come back to you if I can. So can you talk to us a little bit about kind of those first days after 9/11, like what some of kind of the rescue efforts were like, what your experience was then, and then kind of how you saw the city recover over those, following days and weeks?
Yeah, the first few days were a frantic effort to dig into the rubble to find survivors. Unfortunately, we realized within about 24 hours that no one There was a few people rescued that initial 24-hour period. There was a couple of police officers that were trapped within some crevasses and, voids. And once they were extricated, we came to the realization that there was going to be no more, unfortunately, intact human beings alive that would be removed. On the fire department air system, it's called self-contained breathing apparatus. It's that big tank in the mask you wear. There's a warning device. When you stop moving for 30 seconds, it just starts whining like a very loud, almost like an Amber Alert on a phone. And it'll continue to whine until you either yourself shut it off or you're found unconscious. And those devices went fully engaged for about 3 days. And those were our colleagues that were trapped and unfortunately gone. I finally got home about 4 days after the recovery, and we were just sent home by command, because when you get that fatigued and you can't breathe, you're just useless at a point in time. So we were sent home for about 12 hours to clean up, recoup. And my wife said to me, well, I have some good news. I just found out today I'm pregnant. And I felt horrible saying it. I said, well, that's great. I said, but my friend John, his wife just found out this morning as well, but he's dead. The survivor's guilt had set in very rapidly, very severely. And in May of '02, my friend John's wife gave birth to their son. And 3 days later, I had my little girl. So it was tough to move on from it without that guilt, without that constant why him and not me. And I know many of my military colleagues in this room have suffered the same. You just constantly question. But I was very blessed. My life moved on. I moved up to lieutenant. I took it upon myself to help with the rebuild of the department and train the new folks like yourselves, the younger folks coming up. I was blessed to take part in that. But unfortunately, a few weeks prior to the 10th anniversary in 2011, I came down with a very aggressive, rare leukemia. I spent a month in a cancer ward. I received 2.5 years worth of chemotherapy in 7 days. And if it didn't work, I wasn't going to survive. But by the grace of God and my Irish mother praying on overtime, I'm still here 12 years later. Thank you.
Can I pause you there,
Yeah,
Nels?
sure.
I wanna come back to this
Yeah.
and what you experienced there, because
Sure.
you talked about that before we got up here.
Yes.
And I think that's a huge takeaway. But I
Sure.
wanna come back to Heather if I can. Heather, you told us about what you experienced that day. Can you tell us about your experiences in Iraq? Participating in the global war on terror a little bit?
So following 9/11, we flew 24/7 combat air operations over DC with stacks of fighters and tankers and AWACS coming in. The FAA had grounded all aviationalists. It was military, US government, first responders. And we flew that 24/7 combat air patrol nonstop for the next 9 months. Actually, maybe even a little bit longer, until we began to spin up to go to Iraq. Clearly, some of our brothers and sisters were already over in Afghanistan. I was a nighttime scud hunter, scouring the western deserts of Iraq and supporting special operations troops during the kickoff of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And then in 2006 went back again. But I think what I really want to tell you is that when your time comes, you must be ready. So take the time now to prepare yourself to be the best that you possibly can be at your specialty. Because when it comes, and it will, you have to be ready to execute with excellence. And you don't need to be worried about whether or not you'll have the courage, because you will. What needs to be done will be clear. And you won't do it for you. You'll do it because there are things in this world that are bigger than you and more important than you. whether or not that's your brothers and sisters in arms, whether or not that's the oath that you took, whether or not that's the mission, but because you will raise your right hand and take an oath of service, that will forever change you and who you are and your why. So you don't need to be worried about whether or not you're brave enough or strong enough or am I going to have the courage to do what needs to be done. Because when your time comes, you will. What happened to our nation after 9/11? Clearly the long wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, and we still have been unable to extricate ourselves from the Middle East. The fall of the Soviet Union was not the end of history, it turns out. And because our nation committed so much blood and treasure to the Middle East for the last 20 years, for those of you who are in the Navy and the Air Force specifically, you are now operating the oldest and the smallest force structure that you have ever had in your history. At a time when the global security environment has at least one peer competitor, China, and another resurgent nation, Russia. So this is one of the most dangerous periods in our recent history. So it isn't simply be ready because when your time comes, you won't have time to prepare, but be ready because our way of life will depend on you, whether or not that's maintaining the Pax Americana that we have essentially enjoyed because of the greatest generation since the end of World War II, or because we have actually been challenged by an opportunistic competitor. It's not an easy message to deliver, and it certainly won't be an easy message to receive because the future will rest on your hands. But I've met a lot of you, not you specifically in this room, but I've talked with a lot of our ROTC cadets, and I've been out to the academies, and our young lieutenants, and you guys are smarter, faster, stronger than we ever were. I have a lot of faith in you, and our nation has a lot of faith in you.
Heather, can I add one thing? So you mentioned be ready at all times. So I was an artillery officer. So when I joined my unit, my platoon sergeant, who was an artillery, sergeant first class, old school artillery guy, we deployed to Iraq, and we were there early, May 03 to July 04. So we were figuring out the mission. So we were in Baghdad, so you can't really use heavy artillery in an urban combat, right? So we had to park the guns, and we were given the mission of looking for IEDs, doing foot patrols. And I remember the old platoon sergeant was like, "This is not what we did." He said, "This is not what I did AIT, sir. I'm not an infantry guy, right? I'm an artilleryman." It's like, "Yeah, Sergeant, got it, but this is the mission now, right? You have to adjust." And so we had to retrain all our artillery soldiers in how to do close quarters combat, how to do stacks, right? And there was a lot of pushback, but at the end of the day, it was like, look, this is the mission we have to do. To your point, we were given it, we had to execute. So for you, the young people out there right now, like when you're getting out there, be flexible and thinking, but at the end of the day, you have to have that warfighter mentality at all times, regardless of what your MOS is. So, we had some pushback initially. Eventually, everyone did get on board because there was no other job, right? So we had to do that. So it was a great point on that, Heather, being always ready.
You're going to have to figure it out.
You have to figure it out.
And you might not necessarily be trained for it,
Yep.
right? I wasn't trained to scramble, but because I knew my systems, my aircraft systems inside and out, I could improvise. There will be a lot of improvisation that will be required for you. And here's the other thing that really connects to what Shaw was saying is that you will have to accept risk. You will not get it perfectly the first time. You have to be willing to do things wrong in order to be able to get things right. We have grown up in a risk-averse society of helicopter moms, and I'm not going to do it unless someone else is going to take responsibility for it. You push the responsibility up the chain to the commander, and we aren't going to have time for that. You need to be willing to accept responsibility, be accountable, and chunk the rock. Do it the best you can when the time comes.
So quick funny story to lighten up the mood. To your point, take the risks. So we were I forgot where we were, and there was like a roadblock, and I was with my sergeant was driving, and there was a roadblock blocked off. We're in a Humvee, and we're on patrol, and I just say, hey, Sergeant, let's go through here. He's like, hey, can we go here? I was like, we're the one with the guns. We can go wherever we want, right? So who's going to stop us? So, but to your point, take risks when you're out there. And I know Jared and I talked about before, asking for forgiveness instead of permission is a good motto I learned from my old platoon sergeant as well.
That's what Mission Command is,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, yeah. Jared?
Very easy to beg for forgiveness after the fact, right? As long as you know what you're doing is right. Thanks, Shaw, and thank you so much, Heather. And Nils, I want to come back to you and talk to us a little more about the friends and the colleagues that you have that are still feeling the physical effects of 9/11 and kind of that story. I think that story doesn't get told enough. I think a lot of people focus on the people that we lost that day, and that obviously is an incredible, important story. But there's a lot of people that are still with us that are feeling the physical effects of 9/11. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience and your friends and family that are having those experiences?
Yes, I've personally been very blessed with full remission. I had to retire, which was the worst part about it. They train you in everything else in the warrior class, military, first responder. The only thing they don't train you in is how to retire. Unfortunately, since retiring 12 years ago, out of a department of 10,000 people, we have hundreds, well into the hundreds that have cancer. This is just the fire department. When you include the police and the other services that responded that day, we've lost 4,000 rescue and recovery workers to 9/11 illnesses, primarily cancers. There's hundreds more right now sick. Out of my crew that day of 25, there's probably 16 of us who now have cancer, but they call us the lucky truck because we're in remission, but there's other engines and trucks that had 5 or 6 guys with cancer or girls with cancer, and 3 of them have passed. So it's kind of a dirty, rotten secret. No one really talks about it anymore because it's 22 years later. And now there's autoimmune diseases are jumping off the graph. A lot of MS, a lot of lupus, a lot of the diseases that are normally not found in a male. There's no way of describing it. There's no more coincidence. So I try to go out there and explain to people what's going on. There's a lot of warriors suffering in silence. And we had to fight for our legislation, for our medical coverage. We were actually, early on in the early 2000s, some of my colleagues were actually losing their homes because of their medical bills for cancers they suffered from 9/11 and had to pay for. I can run on for a long time. There's just one thing I'd like to finish with. It's all about that flag. You are our future. You are our guardians at the gate that are going to keep the wolves out. Be proud, be prepared, be trained. Never, ever let someone deny you what you are, which is a brave warrior. But be grateful. Be grateful for that flag and these gentlemen here from the greatest generation, Korea and Vietnam, and the Major. Folks who've put it all on the line for your freedom and for the right for the people out there who have a whole lot to say, who haven't done a whole lot to earn it. Thank you for your future service.
Thank you so much for sharing.
For the better, then you can pass on to everyone else to take as a lesson to kind of either improve their lives or just a different outlook and perspective. I know for me, after spending a year and a half in the desert, like it takes a lot for me to get frazzled, right? I've been in very bad circumstances. I didn't experience anything what you all did, but I realize when I see people complain about their phones breaking or the car, that's like, yeah, guys, it's trivial stuff, right? So I guess for you, like, what kind of takeaway can you take that would help everyone kind of put things in perspective? Anything that you learned that helped you after the fact? And everybody else done.
It was a long struggle for me, but I think for all of you young people, you think your life's going to be this serious, positive trajectory. You are going to have hiccups all along the way. Sometimes you probably didn't make a sports team. You didn't get invited to a party. you got dumped by somebody. Those are all hard lessons to learn, but you have to look at those and start to figure out, well, maybe I wasn't a good enough player to make the team. Maybe they weren't my best friends to help me get there. And look at what you're going to do to improve yourself and work harder and better to make things easier for you. Because you can't, when you go down, you could go really deep, and you don't want to. You want to try to figure it out and make yourself go up again. Because for a couple of years, I was blank after 9/11. I lost 61 colleagues in a matter of minutes. I didn't know if I wanted to live or die. I didn't want to hang out with my kids. I didn't want to see anybody. And it was challenging, but I realized that there's a whole life ahead of me now. And, you know, I lost a nephew just shy of his 12th birthday to cancer. I just had heart surgery, but I'm good. Life is going to be good for all of you, and it's going to continue. And in this free nation, continue to work hard to be positive and work yourselves to the benefit of yourselves, really.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And Heather and Niels, I'll give you guys a chance to get a couple last comments, and we also want to see if there's any questions from our audience in a moment. But Heather, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Yes, and it's about the greatest generation. You've had a chance here to listen to the greatest generation. When America saved the free world, and it wasn't professional soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that did it. It was everyday, ordinary Americans that were, you know, the soda jerk at the water fountain. It was the accountant. It was ordinary people went and did extraordinary things. Flight 93, the passengers on Flight 93 that made the decision to attack the terrorists and deliberately crash that airliner into the Pennsylvania countryside to protect us, not a single one of them was a veteran. They were ordinary, everyday Americans. So while you may be one of the less than 1% who has made the choice to serve our nation, to protect and defend our Constitution, the United States, our way of life, know that not only in you, but in the rest of America, that DNA from the greatest generation, thank you, gentlemen, that's still alive. It's still within us. That is our legacy. Make them proud.
Thank you, Heather. Any final word?
I'll try to keep
Niels?
it brief.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I'll give you a couple seconds.
Be kind, be grateful, but be grateful because you're American. It is a privilege. It is an honor. You have big shoes to fill. Greatest generation wore some big old boots. Now you fill them. Thank you for your future service, and God bless you. Be safe.
Thank you, Niels. Appreciate it.